Hello everyone. So I know we said we were going to talk about combinations this week, but I have changed my mind, as I am wont to do. Instead, we're going to talk about feints. So, the reason we're talking about feints is because when it comes to building combinations, you need to have this understanding of feints in your back pocket. So what is a feint, or failure? Now, I ask my students this question a lot. A common answer you will get is, it is a fake attack, or a faked attack. I don't like using this definition, because the attack itself should not be fake. The attack should be real. Because if it's not real, the opponent should not be moving. So the reason I go over that is because a lot of people have gotten into the habit, and I used to do this too, of being twitchy, of throwing out and then throwing their actual technique. Now, will that work? Yes. However, I was fortunate enough that when I first started fencing, my training partner would actively, throw away whatever point system we were working on and just stand there and let me see how I was wasting time and should have just hit him on the first one because he didn't react. And then he started just parrying the second one and I really looked stupid. So, it's not that you can't use twitchy movement, it's that in general when it comes to conditioning the opponent, especially if you're fighting in a tournament or fighting people you don't normally fight, you need to be putting in that base level of I will hit you. So, usually the first thing you got to do is have a strong opener. And you should show your opponent this strong opener. You should attack in and come back out. So we talked about moving in and out of the Zufechten. That's where this is from. I come in, I throw a real attack. I'm doing things like that. I'm doing actual probing attacks that show my opponent, hey, I'm gonna hit you. Now they realize my attacks are actually real. Now I can look for feint depending upon what they're doing. If every time I throw my attack they back up, I shouldn't throw a feint. I should let my point come out, so I've done cut 2, and then I should follow with a thrust. We talked about that before. If my opponent backs up and I'm already out, okay, I can follow through with another technique, but usually I prefer going forward with the point. And the reason I like doing that is because if the opponent backs up and my point is out, and I come forward, they defend, there's a cut for me anyway. I have more pursuing options that way. Now, if your opponent instead as you come in is coming in to meet you, don't feint. Because if I come in and he comes in and I try to pull back, I've just lost all of my structure, I've lost all of my defense, that's when I'm going to get hit. Instead, if your opponent is rising to defend, then's the time for your feint. You want to actively make sure you're looking for where their sword is moving. Keep an eye on where their body's moving as well. If it's someone who is in the HEMA sport fencing posture, typically your attack is going to be coming along this line. This defense is very natural for them, and because of how strong you feel, because your right leg is already forward, they're probably not going to move their feet very much. If, however, you've got someone in vom Tag or maybe Flug or something along those lines, they're probably going to be moving at least a little bit to get this defense going because they want to bring this hip up to defend themselves. So, we've got our opponent moving and you're looking at how they're moving. Also look at what their sword is doing. Are they going out to parry or are they just moving to block? We've talked about that before. If they're moving out to parry, your feint can still happen. Same with block. It's just things will change a little bit and an option is presented. So, I've come in with my attack and my opponent is going to defend. When do I actually do the feint itself? So, what I mean by that is, do I do it here? Do I do it out here? Should it be just before the sword hits? The answer to that is when you believe you've sold it. When the opponent is really moving to that defense, that's when you pull it back. Now, when I say pull it back, I don't necessarily mean literally. There are a lot of different openings you can go to, and that's the next thing you need to decide is, alright, I've thrown one attack, where is my feint going to go? If I'm causing them to defend up here, I could attack here, I could attack low, I could attack below, I could even turn it over and turn it into a plunging attack. But that's less of a feint, more of a morph. Morph isn't a technical term, by the way, but anyway. So I've decided where I need to decide where I'm going to go based upon what they're doing. Now, this is where things get interesting, because you can decide what sort of targets you're taking. For example, If you cut high at someone and you see they're going to defend like this, you can just take that forearm and leave. If you see someone who's defending a little bit more upward, take those ribs. If you see somebody who is coming back, right, this is a good opportunity to take arm. This is a good opportunity to even spring again and come for head. It's depending upon their distance and what openings they're giving you as to what you should take. In general, there's nothing wrong with taking an arm and leaving, but take into account that that's going to condition the opponent to now be looking out for easier hits. So, for example, and I've had this happen to me, you know, a guy comes in, I go to defend, he claps my arm and gets out. I'm like, okay, that's never going to happen again. I am not going to let you have that arm, which means the next time I move over here, I'm going to be ready to come back and come in, which you need to be ready for. So if you're the one throwing the feint, I go to defend, oh, I'm coming back down because you're going for my arm. Now you need to have a second part, okay? So here's the feint, there's the arm, he's moving to defend. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and raise up for a thrust, right? Something along those lines. Or even go, okay, I'm going to bind on the sword, and then I'm going to exploit what you give me. That stops being a feint and starts being a combination. We'll get back to that later. But you need to be aware of what your feints are going to do, especially when it comes to hitting the arms, because people don't like getting hit in the arms. More than anything else, they will doggedly defend their hands. But either way, back on topic, I'm going to attack out. They're raising to defend. I've chosen where I'm going to go next. In this case, I'm going to go from below. Now the question is, how much do I move my sword? Well, if they're just blocking and I don't have a ton to go around, I probably don't need to pull it back all that far. That's probably more than enough. If they are actively parrying outward, I may need to really pull back the sword and do a little bit more footwork to attack that opening. It just depends upon how much of this you need to get around. Now, when it comes to feinting with other strikes, so we're doing just a basic overhaul at the moment, the other thing you've got to be aware of is what mechanical defenses your strikes have. So the overhaul is nice and simple, right? Sword goes out. Even if you're not really paying attention to defense, it is defending you. Other strikes, not as much. For example, the Zwerchau, the most feinted strike in all of German longsword. If I throw a Zwerchau, I'm not safe until I'm here, when the Schild is out in front of me and defending me. If I get caught here, I'm not defended. If I get caught here, I'm not defended. This is because when I strike, it looks a bit like an overhaul when it starts. I flip, and then I am pulling upward to cut in. You've got to get that out there as soon as you can, which means that when I harass somebody with a feint here, I don't want them reacting to this. I want them reacting to the tip of my sword coming at them. So wider steps are better. So if I'm going to feint a Zwerch, I'm going to use good distance and really come in with this point. Get them focused on that. Oh, they see it coming in. Now I can start adding in my next piece. Boom, boom, right? That's the idea behind it. You want them afraid of this, not your hands moving. Now, an important thing to note. If you're going for a feint and you muck up, you hit their sword, should you follow through with the next attack? You still certainly can. It's no longer going to be a feint. You are going to give them some sensory feedback, so they might parry. But if you've hit and the opening is, well, hit their blade and the opening is still there, absolutely. Go for the next attack. There's nothing wrong with that. Alternatively, especially if they block and you've landed your attack, duplierins or other working around actions or winds are great for that moment. And that's where we start getting into the idea of conditioning the opponent, because what we can get them into the habit of doing is either multiple feints or even faking fakes. So, how does that look? Well, I condition my opponent to be afraid of this overhaul. Boom. Okay, he starts to move to block. I take that hand, right? He's now afraid of that. So I'm going to come in. I'm going to start pulling back. He moves to defend his hand, so I'm going to come right back down along the initial line I was in. I conditioned him. He was like, he's going to take my hand, so he opened the opening that I already was targeting from the get-go. So that kind of closes the loop. The other option you've got is, every once in a while it's like, okay, I'm throwing this real attack and you're expecting me to feint. When he starts to move, just continue through with it. It's a really fun game that you can do with your training partners. Is one of you fencer A, one of you fencer B. Fencer A, your job is to attack with a real attack, and then only when fencer B believes it and goes to defend, that's when you do whatever feint you're doing. Fencer B, your job is to stand there, and only when you are 100% convinced you're gonna get hit, do you defend. It becomes really, really fun, and we'll start getting you used to looking for that kind of stuff. Because intent in fencing is something you can kind of feel. Not always, and some people are more deceptive, and once you get the measure of a person, it's a lot easier. But when someone is attacking you for real, you should feel it on a certain level, and understand that this is something he's coming to get me from. Now, with time, that should blend together, and you should become more deceptive to the point that even if you have an attunement to this, you're like, that looks real. Oh, right? So, that kind of thing. But, next part. So we started faking fakes. Now let's talk about turning the feint into something else. So, I've thrown this real attack, right, a couple times. He's used to the idea of me twitching around. What that's going to lead to is, once you get used to someone twitching around, especially against Verkaus, you're going to start going, okay, I know that first attack is going to be feinted. It's dangerous still, so I do need to defend, but it's gonna move into something else. This guy's a twitcher. So what you're gonna start seeing is even a person who does good parries is usually going to start to do meh blocks. Because at this point, they're just fulfilling the obligation of, yep, okay, right? And that's a setup. So, what you can start doing is going, okay, I'm going to now actually land on your blade. Because you might catch them in one of two situations. Number one, you blow through their bad block, or even catch them while they're moving. That's awesome. Number two, you make that contact, and the person goes, aha, I've got you. How about that? Or, their feint failed, cool. But because they're now in such a bad block, that's when you launch in for your duplierins or other techniques behind the blade, or things that redouble on the same side. The idea there being, you condition the opponent to be ready for things on this side, they completely forgot about all the options on this side. And you can just continue expanding that and expanding that and expanding that. So that's basically a general overview of feints, so let's recap real quick. So, a feint is a failed attack, not a fake attack. It has to be real, you've got to believe it's real, so the opponent believes it's real, because if it's not, he's not going to move. When do you start the pullback for your next technique? It should happen when the opponent is fully moving and committing to defense. If they're just retreating or what have you, follow them with other techniques. If your opponent has now started parrying where your feint is, you can either add another feint component to it, go back on yourself and attack the initial opening once they start to move, or you can switch into fighting them out of whatever they're parrying with, because, you know, attack, they parry, they're coming forward. I have an opening now. I can work with that. I can work with that. And then finally, dropping the feints altogether and making your attack real again. Okay? I've gotten them used to, they're scared of it, but it's not really something they're afraid of anymore. They're not thinking about that attack in its fullest extent. Now I'm going to actually land my attack, they parried it, that's fine, and work from there and do whatever I'm going to do. So, and obviously I've been using the longsword today, but this general idea works with every single other weapon. With rapier, I just keep harassing with the point. I thrust, they gonna move, I go under, they continue to go down, I cut, things like that. With saber, or backsword especially, feints are awesome. That's where that medium guard comes in, that you don't really stand in, but you move through the whole time. Yeah, pretty much every weapon has it. Even wrestling has it to an extent, but that's a deeper topic. Otherwise though, hopefully that was helpful, and we'll go over combinations next week, because now we have an understanding of all the pieces I want you to have. So, thank you very much for watching, and we'll go over combinations and other techniques another time.